Gary, the Chinese have lifted sanctions on these British politicians, but they don't seem very happy about it.
No, they worry that somehow Keir Starmer has negotiated some murky deal with the Beijing regime in order to get these sanctions lifted, and they don't want them lifted that urgently anyway. They despise the regime, they despise the action, but it doesn't exactly impinge on their lives. It's not like they were coming to China, which is one of the things they're not allowed to do. It's not like they have investments in China, which would be frozen. So they are unimpressed.
Now, the Prime Minister's also being criticised by his opponents for, well, piddling deals. You know, nothing very much here.
Yeah, the real tangible was the reduction in tariffs on whiskey, but it's not mega numbers you're talking about there when you think about the size of the British economy, but they are putting out some mega numbers, sadly without detailed costings underneath them about how they've got 2 billion worth of export deals here, 2.3 billion of market access. I don't know how you quite calculate that. They say the numbers are coming.
And yet Donald Trump has waded in, saying this is all very dangerous.
Yes, as ever. Donald Trump wades in on everything, and he's waded in and said Keir Starmer should not be here negotiating the sort of deals he's doing. He seemed to be slightly trying to get at Mark Carney, really, for coming here and negotiating a bigger deal on behalf of Canada. But at the end of the day, Donald Trump is part of the reason why so many leaders are coming here, because he's an unreliable ally, and yet again, blowing up like this, he's kind of proved it. Here's how Keir Starmer's day went today.
Can we get the police out of the way, please? Can we call the police out of the way?
Not something people usually dare to shout here. Keir Starmer is spending his third night in China in Shanghai. His trade delegation flew here with him. His political team are cooing about what they say was a meeting with President Xi yesterday in Beijing that produced more than they'd hoped for. Number 10 released its own footage of the Prime Minister asking the leader of China, "How do I say thank you?" And there was another thank you today when the Prime Minister had finished this business event. He revealed that China had just lifted the sanctions it had imposed on several parliamentarians 5 years ago in retaliation for their attacks on China's human rights record. But the visit got an early bad review from that most unreliable of allies, Donald Trump. He was asked what he thought about Keir Starmer's trip here when he was attending the premiere of a new film about his wife.
What do you think about the UK getting into business with China? Keir Starmer was in Beijing.
Well, it's very dangerous for them to do that, and it's even more dangerous, I think, for Canada to get into business with China.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Keir Starmer insisted the White House was fully aware of this trip, and the US President himself was coming to China in a couple of months. Talking to design students, the Prime Minister reached for the safe topic of the Downing Street cat, Larry.
Very popular in Downing Street as well. Every time we have an international leader come visit, Larry's always at the front door.
After more trade talks in Shanghai tomorrow, the Prime Minister hops across to Tokyo to meet Japan's new Prime Minister. Maybe compare notes on the occupant of the White House who spreads anxiety amongst America's long-standing allies on a daily basis, and who many worry has presented China with a great opportunity to exploit. Earlier, I caught up with the Prime Minister, and I started by asking him about that lifting of sanctions on parliamentarians. You've just announced what you think is some good news, something else you think you've extracted from the Chinese government.
Well, a lot of my colleagues in Parliament have been concerned about the restrictions that have been applied to a number of individuals in Parliament, and I therefore raised that in the course of this visit. And the response from the Chinese has been that the restrictions no longer apply. And President Xi said to me that what that means is that all parliamentarians are welcome to visit China. Now, that is important in its own right, but it also sort of underscores the point I've been making all along, which is by engaging, by having this visit, it allows us to take the opportunities which we've been able to do, but also raise the difficult issues which are of concern to parliamentarians and get a better resolution of.
But what you've achieved there might go to the heart of what some critics think is President Xi pulling the wool over our eyes, because it was largely a cosmetic sanction on these MPs. It froze their assets in China. It prevented them going to China when none of them intended to anyway. What they actually did on the side, behind the scenes, was intimidate them and their families, the MPs say. And all the other things that China does that it doesn't talk about, these were stated sanctions, you haven't got those stopped.
Well,
industrial scale espionage and the rest of it.
Very important that the restrictions no longer apply, and that message from President Xi that all parliamentarians are welcome. And we do raise difficult issues. And so,
but the one they've moved on is this one that I think quite a lot of people would see was fairly cosmetic.
Well, it's a very important matter for parliamentarians. We've raised the issue, as we've raised a number of sensitive issues, but we've also taken the opportunities here because there's been a re-engagement which now will be measured in a huge amount of money going between the two countries, jobs back in the United Kingdom, tariffs on whiskey have been halved, and that is now coming into force on Monday. So that's the speed of change in relation to that.
That's a real sort of tangible that you've come back with. It saves the whiskey industry $1 million a week.
They're very pleased.
I bet.
And everybody who's...
But it's not historic, is it? I mean, that's one industry saving $1 million a week.
Yeah.
That's small fry.
Well, let me take that in two stages. Firstly, if you're in the whiskey sector, I don't think they'd take kindly to saying it's small fry. It's massive for them because this translates into many more jobs in whiskey, and that's a good thing and all success to them. But the bigger prize, if you like, the bigger picture, which you put to me absolutely rightly, is that this visit opens access to the market. We've got, I think, 60 chief executives of businesses travelling with us from all different sectors, and they are very, very pleased with the outcome because they know that the certainty and the confidence that this gives is a game changer for them, and that's why they're pleased.
But you never got certainty and confidence when you're dealing with China, have you? I mean, you talked about hoping to have a deal on financial services access to China. People have been trying to get that for so long. They're virtually exhausted by the project. I mean, nobody thinks China's going to do that.
Well, not in the last 8 years, under the last administration, we had a completely inconsistent, incoherent approach to China. So I'm not surprised that no progress was made.
Yes.
We've been
some of this comes down to what China is like, how they behave.
We've set out our consistent path. We've had the engagement that we wanted to have, had very warm engagement with President Xi yesterday, as a result of which that certainty and confidence are there. And for businesses, that is what they're looking for. And they're reporting to me that even in the last 24 hours, the confidence in the conversations that they're having, the contacts they're able to pursue in relation to good business opportunities back in the United Kingdom has materially changed. So if you see this through the eyes of a business person, you can see what a material difference this makes.
But this man, who you were sitting across the table from yesterday, I mean, the assessment of British intelligence is that we can't have him anywhere near our energy infrastructure because he'd quite like to switch it off and sabotage us if the mood took him. He's still that person, isn't he?
We will always...
You haven't been dewy-eyed in these encounters.
We will always put our national security first. I think that's absolutely clear from the measures that we've taken as a government. But to simply stick your head in the sand and say we're not prepared to engage at all is foolhardy. And other countries...
Donald Trump seems to be wading in on you on this, saying that what you've done is very dangerous. What do you think he means by that?
China is the second biggest economy in the world. With Hong Kong, it's our third biggest trading partner. This trip has been a great success.
Do you have any idea what made Donald Trump say that?
Well, I saw the clip from Donald Trump. I think it's fair to say he was talking more about Canada than us.
He was asked about you.
Hear me out. As close allies, we obviously discussed this trip with his team before we came. And I think I'm right in saying that Donald Trump is expected to visit himself.
So he's being a bit erratic.
April. And therefore, for the UK to, the French president visits recently, the German Chancellor is coming in the next few months. It wouldn't be in our national interest to be the only country that sits with our head in the sand, not taking the opportunities that we've opened up by this visit.
Very quick last one, if I may. We talk about, I talked about, you didn't offer agreement with the term, and the erratic president of the United States. On the Chagos Islands, partly to do with China's activities in the ocean around it, you negotiated a long lease to try and make sure that Diego Garcia was secure as you see it. He seems to have turned round and said that's not sustainable. Could we consider actually ripping up the agreement we've got with Mauritius? And what happens then? Does America have to sort of either go in and make its own deal with Mauritius, or could it invade?
Well, the base is a very significant military and intelligence base, and the deal we've reached secures it for a very, very long time, which is in our national interest and in American interests. When the administration changed in the US, we paused for 3 months to allow a review to take place in the US. That was an agency-led review. As a result of that, the US was clear that it was in their interest and they supported the deal, and that was the administration generally, the Secretary of States, but also President Trump himself.
So you don't think he's going to U-turn on
Well,
that?
we've been talking to his team.
You're pausing it again?
We've been talking to his team over recent days about it, but I'm clear it's the deal we need to secure the base for military and intelligence purposes. And when the US looked at it for 3 months, looking at all the evidence, their conclusion was that they strongly supported the deal.
Prime Minister, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Well, Donald Trump has already made his feelings clear about Keir Starmer's bid to build closer relations with Beijing, calling it very dangerous. But Mr. Trump might find that his desire to put America first could come crashing up against the economic realities of the global marketplace, one where China, in his terms, holds many of the cards. Harry Fawcett reports.
Good to see you again.
If doing deals with China is very dangerous, President Trump should warn President Trump. 3 months ago in South Korea, he met President Xi after another spasm of trade war rhetoric.
But he's a very tough negotiator. That's not good.
A negotiator well aware that the US military, as well as its tech sector, relies on Chinese rare earths, exacting a 10 percentage point cut in US tariffs to keep them flowing for another year at least.
The restrictions over rare earth mineral supplies was one of those trump cards China had up its sleeves, so it used it. And with Trump behaving effectively like a schoolyard bully, when the other side stood up and stood tall, the bully backed off, and China won.
And this month, Trump finalising his approval for advanced NVIDIA AI chips to be sold into China, with a 25% markup payable to the US government, despite concerns about national security and competition with China in artificial intelligence.
The goal is to balance, to simultaneously achieve national security, as well as technology leadership, as well as economic leadership. And every country needs to find that balance, and President Trump has found his balance.
But the US president keen to keep others off balance, not least Canada's Prime Minister, himself doing business in Beijing just 2 weeks ago and now threatened by the White House with 100% tariffs.
We know that President Trump himself has been playing off all his allies against each other, trying to make them cut the best deals with him for his own benefit. And the US itself is seeking to actually expand its economic relationships with China in certain areas, even while it's continuing to compete on other fronts.
Those fronts being drawn ever more inside what the US sees as its Western Hemisphere, citing the threat of Chinese influence as one reason for deposing Venezuela's Nicolas Maduro, and for what was, a few days ago at least, the unqualified need to own Greenland in order to defend it fully, rather than rely on its status within NATO. What signal does that send to another US ally, Taiwan, in the aftermath of a major Chinese simulation of its military blockade and seizure? But there is another element at play in this relationship, the personal. This is a US president with an eye for a strongman.
The Chinese do realize that Trump has a genuine affection and admiration for Xi Jinping. But regrettably for Donald Trump, that feeling was not reciprocated. China has a system whereby the top leader can impose pain on the country, and the country will have to grind and bear it.
Donald Trump, by contrast, has midterm elections to worry about, an electorate worried about the economy. One motivation, perhaps, for the second year of his term, in US-China relations at least, to be less contentious than the first.
Well, joining me now from Washington is Dr. Elliot Cohen, former counselor at the US Department of State and now the Arleigh Burke Chair in Strategy at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you for joining us. Do you think Britain should take any notice of Donald Trump when he says that the Prime Minister's visit here is very dangerous?
Well, you can't help but take notice of it. How seriously you should take it, that's another matter. I think this particular remark doesn't mean anything. I do think that Trump, being the kind of guy he is, will be keeping an eye on allies who begin courting China. Now, the fact that they're courting China as a result of his own rhetoric towards our allies, that will escape them. But it is something to follow, and I wouldn't rule out that at some point he might try to retaliate if he thinks that somebody is being too cozy with Xi Jinping.
Right, but he's due here possibly in April. In fact, it's possible that Trump and Xi will meet 3 or 4 times over the next 12 months. So he seems to be getting pretty close to them as well. What's his strategy?
Well, I'm not sure that Trump ever has a strategy. Look, he's the most erratic president that we've ever had. This is a White House that does not work on the basis of well-developed policies. It's a White House that's driven by quite a unique personality, and that has no particular problem with hypocrisy. I mean, the fact that he's meeting with Xi Jinping, I'm sure in his own mind, is just fine, and other Western leaders meeting with Xi Jinping, well, then he very well may not approve of that. I do think your report was right. That, managing the U.S.-China relationship, this is probably the most difficult foreign policy problem of any president, not just now, but going forward for the next couple of decades. And Trump is feeling his way. And I think he has discovered that the Chinese are a tougher opponent to deal with than virtually any other that he's encountered. And he is, as I said, he's a very much an improvisational kind of leader. And so I don't think he's going to be easy to predict.
Right, and so, as these relationships all slightly shift around, America's allies feel that America is less reliable than it was, and they're looking out for themselves to some degree. I mean, could a country like Britain end up in a situation where it has to accept that whether it's an ally or a strategic trading partner like China, it's going to have disagreements, and it's just got to think about what's in its own best interest?
Well, that's what most countries do most of the time. In fact, I would say all countries do most of the time. I think it's particularly challenging for Britain for a number of reasons. One is economically, you're not in great shape. And actually, militarily, you're not in great shape either. And I think those diminish the negotiating leverage that you have with Trump. On the other hand, Trump does have certain kinds of sentimental attachments, and one of them is to Britain. He enjoys being invited to come over by the king. He occasionally talks about his Scottish roots. And there is the special relationship, or what was the special relationship over a very long period of time. So for any British Prime Minister, this would be a very delicate dance that you've got to work your way through.
Just on that question of he likes coming here. I mean, there is talk of another visit from Xi to Britain. Would Trump be annoyed to see the king with President Xi at Windsor Castle?
I think so. I think again, is there any consistency about that? No, but that's not what you should expect from Donald Trump. I think he would find that troubling. I suspect most American presidents would find it somewhat troubling. He might react in a more pronounced way than other presidents would, however.
Well, thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Cohen. Well, earlier I spoke to Shen Dingley, a professor of international affairs in Shanghai, and I asked him how people here in China view the US president.
China does not say it wants to compete with US, it wants to be a superpower. China often has been humble to say, I don't want to change the post-Second World War order. But the US don't take it this way.
Yes. Well, it's not surprising, is it? Because China is spending a lot of money on weaponry, it's developing its armed forces, It's preparing itself for possibly reunification, as it calls it, of Taiwan, and it is making big inroads into markets around the world.
China openly say, it's my time to give the direction of the world. I should serve as a beacon of the entire humanity.
Can I ask you, we're in a very precarious position around Iran at the moment. It looks like there may be military action from Trump. What will China's response, do you think, be?
So China's initial response must be strongly condemn the U.S. barbaric behavior. What the U.S. sent ground force to Iran, which looks like unlikely. But if that would happen, that might serve China's interest. So U.S. would be trapped there. U.S. would have less care, less resource to be distributed in other places like Indo-Pacific, in the West Pacific, Taiwan Strait area.
And to come back to Trump, how do people in China think of Donald Trump?
Well, he is a very controversial figure in this country. Majority people they don't like him. They think he make a policy erroneously, out of impulse. He did not think over his policy and strategy carefully.
So people laugh at him here?
Most people, they feel he is not a smart people. But I think there are quite a few people, they think he deserves our serious respect.
Yeah. And in this time when great powers are in play, what does China think of Britain?
Great Britain matters greatly. We have a saying in Chinese, 天不生大音，万古如长夜. If Great Britain was not born under the heaven, all humankind would live in darkness. So you are the beacon. You bring sunshine to the world. So these are the great respect that Chinese have invented for your country.
Some of the government's critics back home are saying, what has this visit achieved? It's tiny little steps.
I don't agree with this. In 2015, Great Britain proposed Golden Age. And in 2018, our two countries ironed out such kind of notion, Golden Age. But unfortunately, a year later, given the disruption in Hong Kong, that Golden Age seemed to be darkened. And we expect to have a decade-long Golden Age, but that has only lasted for 1 year. We cannot let it to continue this way. Simply, we imagine nothing would happen after one visit. What about a second visit? So if we take 10 small steps, maybe in an accumulated term, we strike a major step. We cannot allow our two-country relationship to continue to down spiraling. So taking small steps matter.
Shen Jingli, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, joining me now is one of those no longer sanctioned MPs, the former Conservative Party leader, Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, and the former US ambassador to Mongolia, Piper Campbell. Sir Ian, one of the consequences of the sanctions was that Xi Jinping and his ambassador and officials were banned from Parliament. Now that you can travel to China if you want, should they be allowed into Parliament? Should they visit?
Well, it's not my decision, it's the Speaker's decision, but I have seen a recent message from the Lord Speaker, who's much more cynical about the idea that it suddenly cave in. And here's the problem. We are only 6 parliamentarians, 1 ex-parliamentarian remains sanctioned, and a number of other people are made up the total, I think, of 9 individuals, not parliamentarians, people obviously on their own in different spheres, Essex Chambers, Geoffrey Nice, various others. The key thing is they have been left sanctioned. And it does seem to me as they were all sanctioned at the same time, there is an absurdity to the idea that somehow MPs should have special privilege to be desanctioned, as it were, themselves. And I think, I'll be honest with you, I have now looked at this carefully, and I think what's going on here is the Prime Minister claims that he wants a full state visit for President Xi. Of course, Xi couldn't have that state visit whilst Parliament was shut to him. And so all they've done is release the sanctions on us, but cynically, and I really think it's cynical for a British government to leave sanctions on the others who simply cannot defend themselves as parliamentarians can in Parliament. I think that's shocking, and I think it's deeply cynical of him, and I think he should not have had the sanctions released unless everybody had their sanctions taken off them. I think it's cynical.
But international relations does have to sometimes be self-interested and perhaps a bit cynical, doesn't it? I mean, if this is in Britain's best economic interest...
Right, well, you asked the question. We don't have any evidence of any particular deals that will come forward on this. This is all about trying to cozy up to him, to give him this state visit, and he won't be able to do it because of Parliament. But the key point is, well, hang on a second. In what world does a Prime Minister discard members of the public because they're not as important as members of Parliament? We are not. We are the servants of people, not their masters. And the truth is, this is a bad deal on this, and he should not have agreed to this until Xi and his cohorts had said, okay, then because we need to go and we'd love to have this state visit, then we will release it on everybody. So they seem to have come out on top on this one.
Piper Campbell, do you think this is a sensible visit and a sensible move by Sir Keir Starmer?
Well, look, I think it's a challenging time for countries as they seek to navigate what's going on in both the United States and in China. And there are different directions that the US-China could go in over the next year. Either the US and China could kind of reach accommodation over everybody's head, which has to be worrying for the rest of the world, or the United States and China could resume the type of conflict that or challenge and competition we've seen earlier. So I think it's really important and wise that countries engage both with the United States and with China. I'm never opposed to engagement. At the same time, I think that anybody, including the UK Prime Minister, needs to go into those conversations clear-eyed about what the British interests are. And I would say I have to agree with Sir Ian that the protection of British citizens is an important interest.
Right, and isn't Sir Ian also perhaps right about cynicism? You know, if you're in Taiwan, if you're a Uyghur, if you are Jimmy Lai in prison, aren't you slightly worried by this warming of relations between Britain and China?
Quite so, quite so.
And I would say...
Sorry, Piper Campbell, what do you make of that?
I would say that relations do not need to be warm for serious conversations to be had. I would hope that serious conversations are occurring and will occur, and that the United Kingdom will speak for what it believes is right. If people don't do that, if countries don't do that, then China has even less reason to change its current path of behavior.
So Ian, I mean, do you see that China has shifted its position and that perhaps maybe you and your colleagues will shift too? Not all the way, but a little way.
Well, listen, we talk about shifts, but I see no real evidence of it with China. China is, I think, the largest threat we've faced since the Second World War. Its navy and its army are rapidly going to overtake the US in about the next 2 years. They agree with that. They are carrying out a genocide in Xinjiang. They sell products subsidized by slave labor. They break the WTO rules. They've got at least 250,000 Tibetan men in slave labor as well, and they've crushed that nation that was never part of China. They threatened Taiwan. They've taken over the South China Sea.
But our closest ally,
when we add it up, where's the change?
Venezuela. His security forces are shooting protesters on the streets. I mean, don't we have to think about that too?
Yeah, well, they are a democracy. And the thing about America, which of course is glaringly obvious, is that there are plenty of restrictions on presidents, not least of which is the Supreme Court. It is a democracy. We may get differences. We may not like presidents. But unlike China, you dare not criticize China, or you will be like Jimmy Lai, locked away for the rest of your life.